Hello and welcome to chapter 46 of this Flutter course. If you followed the chapters up to this point chronologically, you'll know that we've done a lot of preparation and we're actually about to start preparing our app to be submitted to the App Store and Google Play Store. But before doing that, now that we fixed our icons and our application name for both Android and iOS, we need to fix something called a splash screen. And we talked briefly about splash screens and what they actually mean in the mobile world, for instance, in both Android OS and iOS, and iPad OS for that matter. But for those of you who missed the previous chapter, a splash screen is a screen that is displayed to the user when they open your application from a cold boot, basically, meaning that your application hasn't been running, for instance, in the background in that operating system. And while the application binary is being loaded to the screen and the experience is being loaded to the screen, then the host operating system, in this case Android and iOS, will have to display something to the user while they're waiting for the experience to be loaded. So in native applications, for instance, if you're creating a native application with Kotlin for Kotlin for Android and Swift or Swift UI for iOS, then in that case, there's only one stage of loading for your application, in that you submit your binary to Apple and then to Google Play Store, and then the host operating system just loads your binary, and then that your main user interface is displayed to the user. So it's just one stage. In Flutter, however, there are two stages of loading your application. One is your application binary in itself being loaded, and the second stage is for the Flutter experience to actually be loaded inside your application, since Flutter is its own SDK, basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a splash screen that gets displayed to the user while our application binary is being presented to the user. So let's have a little look at the official documentation for splash screens. And I'm going to bring the screen up here and increase the size perhaps a little bit. So like this. So you see here, as it is explaining here, first you have your Android, for instance, operating system in here, and you tap on your application icon, and then it goes through a series of steps in order to land on your application's main interface. And here there's a great documentation basically for splash screens, which I recommend everybody who wants to submit their application to iOS App Store and Google Play Store to read this thoroughly, because there's great pieces of information here, even if you are just following, for instance, my advice in this chapter. But it is still a good practice to go ahead and read about this. So before we actually go and start designing our splash screen, I also have to mention something that this chapter is quite, in order for you to be able to go through this chapter, you will unfortunately need to have a Macintosh. So because we're actually going to play a little bit with our iOS splash screen, and for that you need to have Xcode, but I'll talk soon about that, as you'll see. So how do we go about creating a splash screen? So there are so many different ways of doing this. And if you're a developer from before, you probably are not so comfortable. You're not this kind of like a unicorn developer. You might not be. A so-called unicorn developer is a developer who's also comfortable with designing. Or you might only be a designer and you've started this course and you've come to this point. So you may actually be comfortable with a tool like Figma. So dependent on your background, you may or may not be comfortable with designing. So I've basically taken the liberty of using a design tool, a free design tool called Figma, for this chapter, which you can access freely with, for instance, a Google account or an Apple ID. Or you could just create a normal free account on figma.com. But I don't make the assumption that you know anything about designing. And for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a very, very, very simple splash screen in Figma, assuming that the person who's watching this course has no information about Figma or designing previously. Okay? So let's have a look. Now that we talked about Figma, let's have a look at Storyboard on iOS. So what we can do in here is to bring our application to the screen. So I'll bring up our app in here, increase the size a little bit so you see it better. And what we can do is to bring up terminal in here. So get rid of a little bit of distraction in here. So let's see. So if we say git status, we have a lot of stuff that we've done, but we haven't committed them. So that's fine. Let those be there. We're going to commit them soon. Okay. So in your application, what I need you to do is to have a look at your iOS application. So there is something in the iOS application generated by the Flutter template when we created our template from the absolute beginning of this course. And there is a file, a specific file called a launch, I believe it's called LaunchScreen.storyboard. If you're not comfortable with iOS development, like native iOS development from before, I can just explain you that a storyboard file is a file that Apple designated for developers to be able to visually design their application and then write the code for it later. And Apple has decided that for specifically the launch screen, for instance, that gets displayed to the user, there should be a dedicated storyboard file for that. So we're going to go ahead and launch Xcode on this Macintosh in order to manipulate that storyboard file. But before we do that, I'm just going to go ahead and open the root folder of our application. Then I'm going to go and let me also change the screen layout a little bit so you see things better. Then inside this iOS folder, so in the root folder of your application, go to iOS, and then you can see two files in here, runner Xcode Proj and runner XC Workspace. And dependent on your settings on your Macintosh, you may or may not be able to see the extensions of these files. I've done so in my Macintosh that I can always see file extensions because it's important for me. So if you're not seeing the extensions, you just have to trust on the icon. So one of these files has this bluish icon which says project here, and the other one is a workspace. I need you to basically double click on this workspace in order to open it. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this workspace inside Xcode. And let's then go have a look at this launch screen inside this runner folder. So if I collapse everything inside, you will see that you have your runner, which is the Flutter templates created workspace. Inside there, we have another runner. And in that runner folder, then you'll have this launch screen. So we can then have a look at this launch screen and see how it is created. You can literally click in here in order to expand the contents of this view controller to have a look at the internals of this launch screen. And a good trick is if you want to expand, you can see here you have to expand this, and then you have to expand this and expand this. If you don't want to expand one step at a time, you can always hold down the Option key or the Alt key and then click on this little arrow, and that expands the entire chain for you. And if you want to collapse the entire chain, you can press down Alt and then click, and then collapses the entire chain. So let's expand the entire chain. And then in here, you'll see that there is a view and then a launch image view, which at the moment is pointing to a file called launch image, which doesn't exist, because if you go to our assets in here, you'll see that launch image is just empty at the moment. Okay, so there is no launch image, meaning there is no splash screen. Okay, so we're going to manipulate this file a little bit, as you'll soon see. So let me just keep Xcode running. Okay, so that was the basics of that launch screen storyboard. And as you see at the caption on the caption at the bottom of the screen, this is an unfortunate thing that that Apple isn't as open, in my eyes at least, as many other companies like Microsoft and Google, in that if you want to, for instance, do native iOS development and have Xcode in order to open your project and run your project, for instance, then you'll have to have a Macintosh because Xcode isn't available on other platforms. And it is very unfortunate. I mean, it's nothing to really be proud of, I would say. I'm a native iOS developer, and I'm actually ashamed of the fact that Xcode, the tool that I use on a daily basis, is only available on a Macintosh, because I might personally, for instance, like to write my code, iOS code, on Ubuntu or Fedora. Or some of you may actually prefer Windows, but let's not go there. Let's just say that you'll unfortunately need Macintosh in order to be able to manipulate that launch screen storyboard file. And for those of you who don't have a Macintosh, you'll need to contact perhaps somebody in your network who does have access to a Macintosh and ask them to manipulate the storyboard file for you and add your icons, as you'll soon see how, and then send that storyboard file back to you. So that's an unfortunate problem. So what we need to do is to actually get to the roots of what we need to work on in this chapter, and that is creating a splash screen. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning of this chapter, I'm going to rely on a free tool called Figma. So let's go ahead. Let me see if I can do some reshuffling on this screen and close a tab in here. I'm going to bring up my browser, going to minimize our application and bring up my browser right here. So I need you to please visit a website called Figma.com. And in Figma.com, then you will have the ability to create your design files. All right. So I'm not going to show you actually how to register for Figma, because that is very easy. So you can just perhaps, if I, for instance, go to and bring up a completely new tab in here and say Figma.com where I'm not logged in, you can just say sign up. And as you'll soon see here, you can continue with Google or use an email address of your choice in order to sign up for Figma. As I mentioned, Figma is free until to a certain point. You can, for instance, work with your normal design files in Figma without having to think about actually paying for a subscription. But if you want to do advanced work, for instance, if you want to do a lot of sharing of your work with other team members, etc., then you will need to pay for Figma. So after you've registered your account in Figma, what I need you to do, please, is just to go and click on new design file. Okay, so I'm going to increase the size in here and just say new design file. All right, so it's created a new design file here for us. And as you'll see in the bottom of the screen in here, I wonder if I actually have to bring my face to the right because I'm blocked by that. So I hadn't noticed that. So, so what you'll need to do is to create a container here on Figma. Maybe this is a better screen setup. Maybe this is better. Okay, so what we need to do in here is to create a container that is 1284 by 2778. And I didn't like make up this number. This is the size of a screen for an iPhone 13 Pro Max. So if you're not a designer, you may not notice, but when you're designing things, you always have to create like your design so that it scales to various sizes. This was not a problem back in 2007 or 2008 when we only had one iPhone and just a handful of Android devices. But nowadays, you have to kind of like create a template in, for instance, Figma, and then ensure that it is scalable for different sizes. But we're not going to focus on that right now. All we're going to do is just to create one splash screen, and then inside our iOS app and Android app, we're just going to make sure that it scales. Okay, so let's just target one device at the moment, and in here I need you to go in here and actually here, sorry about that, and create a rectangle. After creating a rectangle, we're going to go in here and set the width to what I've specified down there, 1284, if I can see my keyboard, and the height is going to be 2778. Okay, so it's a huge rectangle, as you can see here. Okay, so that's our rectangle, and what we need to do is to kind of give this a background color. Now, as you've seen so far, and if you follow the chapters chronologically for this course, you'll know that I basically use a very soft theme in Visual Studio Code for coding, and I absolutely love this. It's the preference. You may like a light theme. I like a dark theme, such as Tokyo Night. And Tokyo Night is a Visual Studio Code theme that is open source, and you can actually grab its colors from GitHub. So what I'm going to do in here is just to make sure that the background color of our splash screens actually painted with that color. Okay, so let's go and search for Tokyo Night in GitHub, and you'll end up in this website, github.com, Ankia Tokyo Night VS Code theme. So if you don't have this link, and if you couldn't be bothered writing this name, you could just Google. So I'm just going to go to Google and say Tokyo Night theme. Okay, and you'll end up with the GitHub link, so you can just click on it. All right, so I'm going to go down here in this theme, and I'm going to grab this beautiful editor background storm color from here. Okay, actually, either we could use storm or night. I'm going to choose storm and just see how it looks like. So grab this code, please, the RGB code for Tokyo Night, and let's go to Figma into our rectangle and just paste it in fill. So that created a nice little background color for us. Okay, so we could just live with this at the moment. Then what we need to do is I like to basically create some sort of a gradient in this background color so it's not so bland as it is right now. So what I'm going to do is just to go to effects in here and then say that we have, actually no, not effects. It's probably in fill. Let's go in fill, press the plus button, and in here, just click on this little space right there. And let's just say that, you know what, actually, I would really like to change the screen layout a little bit so you see my Figma screen better. So I'm going to hide this caption, and let's see if I can change the caption length like this so that it is smaller. And hence I can change the screen layout with my screen, with my face still visible. So I think this is a little bit better. Okay, after doing this fill, so we added a fill effect in here using this plus icon, and go and tap on this little icon next to fill you see here. Clicking on it, you can then say that you want, for instance, a linear, should we create a radial maybe, or a linear gradient? Let's see. Let's create a linear gradient, okay? Then this, as you can see, is a gradient that at the moment is going from black to transparent with 0% in here. So let's make this black point as well transparent, like this, 0. And we're gonna, in both these cases, set the background color as the starting point and the ending point. So click on the starting point, change this color to our Tokyo Night background color, and here as well. So that's that, okay? Then in the middle somewhere, we're gonna create a point and give it 100% transparency, and let's see how it looks like. So in here, can we not have 3 points? Yeah, Figma just went a little bit ballistic on us, but that's okay. So in here, we have that color. In here, we have that color. So the start and the end have to be transparent with that color that we've chosen. And let's go in the middle and just kind of change the color to red. And you can see that it gets created here without a problem. And then what we're going to do for the middle, we're going to go and grab this particular color here. As you can see, it's kind of like a light, very soft light blue. It starts with 7D. So it's 7DCFFF. And I'm going to go back to the Figma design, and in here, change the middle color to that, just like this. Okay, so it kind of creates a nice little effect for us in the middle, kind of a nice gradient. Okay, so after doing that, let's go to our downloads and grab our icon. So I'm gonna go here to downloads, and if you remember, we had this sticky note SVG file, and Figma is great with stuff like this. So let's just grab SVG right in the middle. Okay, and that's our sticky note right here. Okay, so let's see what we can actually do. Should we use the SVG, or should we use maybe our app icons? it's probably better to use actually the app icon. So revert this change, please. So let's not use this SVG. Let's go to our app icons that we extracted in the previous chapter, and let's grab a rasterized PNG, which is this App Store icon, and bring it right here. Okay, so it actually is a nice size. I'm going to use these built-in layout guides in Figma. As you can see, it tells me where the center is. So I'm just going to place our icon right there. And as you can see, it actually blends really well with that background linear gradient that we created. So it's a subtle effect. So you can see that the linear gradient is a little bit visible. And if you disable that linear gradient with this icon, it's very bland. So without that linear gradient, our splash screen doesn't look so well. So you can also play a little bit with the transparency of the entire thing, like 100%. And I feel like this is just crazy. So maybe 20% was actually pretty good. I don't know where I went. So here, let's go back here and say 20%, okay? As it was. So now we have a really good base for our splash screen. So what we need to do now, in order to download this splash screen, you need to select those two layers. So on my Macintosh, I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and click on this icon, for instance, and then click on the next one in order to select both. Or I think you could actually, no, you can't select like that. So you need to basically hold down the Shift key and select both layers. Then press Command G on a Macintosh or Control G on Linux and Windows in order to group these two layers together. Okay, so now it's a group, and I'm just going to call it splash screen, just like that. It doesn't have to be called like that, splash screen, but I just call it so. Okay. So what we need to do is to grab this splash screen in 3 flavors. So normal, like in normal iOS development, you have to support 3 different resolutions for your assets, usually. Some developers are not as bothered with supporting older devices. So they only support, for instance, the resolution of 2x and 3x. And if this doesn't make sense to you, I will just explain what this actually means. Modern devices, on iOS at least, they're called they're called Retina devices, and it's just a term created by Apple many years back, where they said basically they doubled the amount of pixels that a device can display on the screen, but they held the aspect ratio as it was. So if in a little square in an old device, the device could display 4 pixels, then the new devices could display 8 pixels. So they doubled the amount of pixels per square feet. I don't know how you want to say it. And they call it Retina. And then they added, they said every developer needs to provide an image for the old devices, and we call it 1x, as in scale to 1, and the new devices will have 2x. Then newer iPhone devices came out. They had more modern Retina displays and even more pixels packed into the same space. So they said now those devices are able to display 8 times more pixels than the original ones. So it's basically going to be 1x, 2x, and 3x. So I think it's 8 times more. Is that? I don't know. So it's 1x, 2x, and 3x that we have to support. So let's go in here. Let me see if I can shuffle things around so you see better. Maybe like this. So let's go in here in Figma. At the bottom of the screen, you see this export button. So I'm going to press that export. So I'm going to press that export button actually 3 times, as you can see in here. So we have the first one is a PNG. Make sure that they're all PNG files. And the first one has no suffix. Second one has 2x. And the third one has 3x. That's exactly what we need. Okay. So after doing that, what we're going to do is to say export splash screen, just like that. And that's going to do its processing, so it may actually take some time, depending on our internet connection as well. And then we downloaded the zip file. So our work in this file is basically done. And this is the contents of that zip file. As you can see, splash screen PNG, and they're all the same, but their sizes are quite different. You can see the first one is 604 kilobytes, the second one is 1.4 megabytes, and the third one is 2.5 megabytes, okay? So after doing that, let's now remove Safari or your web browser from the screen. And we need to basically go into our source code now. So I'm going to keep this window here, do some reshuffling on the screen, and then I'm going to bring our, let's see, I'm going to bring our application to the screen like this. Okay, and actually we don't need the application. Sorry about that. We kind of need Xcode in here. So let me bring up Xcode. So let's bring Xcode to the screen. And what we need now is to go to our assets in here, run our assets, and we have our launch image right there. So what we need to do is to grab these images one at a time and bring them in here. Okay, so, and they can be called splash screen. That's not a problem. Xcode will do the mapping for us. So as long as this thing in here is called launch image, then we're good to go. So as the caption indicates, we're now going to go and bring these images in here. So we have 3 images you can see in here, and we have 3 placeholders in here that we have to drag and drop our images into. So let's begin by splash screen PNG and bring it to 1x. Let's bring our splash screen 2x into 2x and 3x into 3x. Okay, and just like that. So that part is now done, but we're not really done designing this splash screen as such for the iOS app. So let's go to the LaunchScreen.storyboard file in here. As you see, it doesn't look so well. So we need to find this launch image that is displayed in here. And you can see at the moment its constraints are like very, very wrong. So it just thinks that if you go into this tab, it thinks that this image is 1284 by 2778, but we don't want that. Okay, we want this image to be as big as the screen, but we also want it to fix the aspect ratio of the image so that it always fills the entire contents of the screen, even if that means the image goes a little bit outside the boundaries of the screen. Okay, so that the launch screen looks great on all iOS devices. So what you need to do here is just a little bit of a work on iOS side. So you need to go in select your launch image in this tab in here, which is your dimensions, the size inspector as it is called in Xcode. Go and say that the X is 0 and Y is also 0. So that kind of like make sure that your image starts right there. Then let's just zoom out a little bit and go manually and drag this a little bit so that it fits the screen. So I'm going to drag this point. Let's see if I can do that with my trackpad, or maybe I should use my mouse. And it's like playing a little bit with me just because this launch image at the moment has some constraints. So let's go and actually remove these constraints. So I'm going to remove this horizontal constraint by pressing the backspace button on it, or if you're on Windows and Linux, you have to press the delete button on your keyboard. So now I've removed those constraints, so I should be able to freely size this, hopefully. Let's see. And it's not letting me size this, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at this view and see its size. I can see that view is 896. Then I'm going to go to my launch image and say, okay, your height is also 896. So that's going to ensure that the height of my launch image is the exact same height as the view. Then I'm going to have a look at the view's width is 414. And I'm going to go to the launch image and say you're also 414. Okay. So now the image container actually looks good. However, this launch image, it now has hard-coded values, hard-coded width and hard-coded height. Its X and Y are quite fine. But what we need to do is to create some constraints for it. And constraints are literally, I mean, we're not going to go into native iOS development at this moment, so you need to kind of have some knowledge about this yourself. And if you don't, I'm just going to tell you just quickly how we create these constraints. So what we need to do is to click on our launch image and then drag and hold down the control button on your keyboard. Okay, so click, hold down control, and drag from launch image into the view like that. Then this menu appears on the screen. And then hold down the shift key on your computer, on your Macintosh, and say you want an equal width, equal height, and also you want to see leading space, and you want to say, what else do we want? Yeah, that's fine for now, I would say. I mean, ideally, what we want is for this screen to be in the center as well. So maybe we could just say center horizontal and center vertical. So check these 4 items as you're holding down the shift button. And then you can let go of the shift button and then just click here anywhere on the screen to dismiss of that. So now you can see Xcode is also happy with the constraints that we created. Then what we need to do is just to tell this image to scale according to its width and height. So let's go into this tab, which is called, let's see what this tab is actually called, Attribute Inspector. And inside this scale in here, actually, it's not scale really. I believe it should be content mode in here. And let's just say it is aspect fit. Okay. So it keeps the aspect ratio of the original image, but it also ensures that it's like, yeah, it's fitting on the screen for now. Okay. So let's leave it like this. All right, so let's then go ahead and actually see if this looks okay. So what we could do is to write in Xcode, let's just say, yeah, let's run on iOS 13 Pro, which I believe is the simulator that I have already in here. And from Xcode itself, we can press the run button to have a look at how this actually looks like. And while this build process is going, you can also go to your simulator here and say File and Open Simulator. And I'm just going to choose another simulator as well, such as iPhone 8 Plus. Okay, it is just good idea usually to test your splash screen and the functionality of your application on as many devices and simulator as you can. I mean, I actually prefer to test on real devices, but right now it is quite difficult for me to bring so many test devices on the screen. So I'm just going to use a simulator to test the splash screen. Okay. So now what we're doing is just to compile our application for iPhone 13 Pro, which is a simulator we've been using so far when it came to, for instance, testing our application. So let's move this to the background because this is not really our application. This is our application. So let's bring it here and let's just give some time to Xcode to do the work that it needs in order to build our application for this simulator and also install it and run it so that we can have a look a little bit at the splash screen. So I'm just going to be waiting until that process is done. All right, now our application is running on a simulator called iPhone 13 Pro. So what we need to do is to actually kill the running of the application, because after the application is launched, we're not going to see the launch screen. Even if you, for instance, send the application to the background with Command-Shift-H, that sends the application to home, and bring it back up, there is no launch screen. Remember, launch screen for an application is only displayed when the application is completely dead and is cold booting. So in order to basically kill the application, what you could do is either press the stop button here on Xcode, which basically kills the debug process and also kills the application. So now you can actually click on the application in your home screen and bring it to the foreground. And as you saw, that was the little splash screen that we saw on the screen. So I'm going to kill the app and bring it back up again. And that's our splash screen. So seems to be actually looking fine on iPhone 13 Pro. Let's now change the targeting here and change it to our iPhone 8 Plus, which is the other simulator that I brought up here. And the reasoning for that is that iPhone 8 Plus is still a major player in the market. A lot of people have iPhone 8 Plus, and the screen is fabulous. It is a great phone that people are still using. So, and the huge difference between iPhone 8 Plus and iPhone 13 Pro is that iPhone 8 Plus has no notch. So it doesn't have the notch that you can see in here on an iPhone 13 Pro. So, and it has a home button. So that's a little bit of a thing that we have to think about, that you need to test your application on multiple devices. And now I'm going to kill the application. Oops, I don't actually know what I did. So let's go in here and I'm going to kill the debug process on iPhone 8 Plus as well and run it again. And let me just delete this old app from here so we don't get confused. And if you run the application, did you just see it momentarily that the application, that the splash screen doesn't look so good? It's not doing so well. So if I run it again, do you see the spacing on the right and left? If you pause the video, you will see it. That is because we have a little bit of a problem with our aspect ratio in here. Because you remember in this launch image, we said aspect fit. What we need to do is just to say aspect fill. And aspect fill, what it does, it tries to keep it doesn't try, it keeps the aspect ratio, but it always makes sure that the image is at least as big as its container. So having done that, let's run the application again on iPhone 8 Plus with that change in mind, and let's see how the application looks like. Now it looked a lot better. So there was no empty space to the right and left. I'm gonna kill the application like this, send it up, bring it up, and let's see. Oh, it's because my debug process. I just killed my debug process. So let's kill it again like this. Let's see if I can manage to do that. Kill the application and open it. And now I can see that the splash screen is actually looking good on iPhone 8 Plus as well. Great. Now that things are working fine on iOS, we need to focus on Android. So let me bring up the caption for the next section that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about Android splash screens here. I'll also try to open this URL. So let me bring it here. So you'll see that there is official documentation about creating splash screens for Android as well on developerandroid.com, guide topics UI splash dash screen. And here there is a lot of information that you can have a look at, and like even animations, as you can see in here, what splash screens mean to Android applications, and that you can even animate them, etc., etc. So I suggest that you actually read the documentation for splash screens on Android to get a better understanding of the differences between iOS splash screens and Android splash screens. It's always good to know like the underlying implementation and how it actually works under the hood. If you're a Flutter developer, you don't necessarily have to only focus on Flutter, but since you're deploying your application compatible with, for instance, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, and Android, it's always good to know, in my opinion, how it works under the hood. So if you want to have a look at this, please go ahead and read the documentation on how it works. And now let's go to this little beauty of a link, which is on Stack Overflow, which is one of my favorite websites to find solutions that I can't even think of the answers to. The problems that I can't find the answers to. So let's go ahead and have a look at this URL in here, which will explain to you the different resolutions that we have to provide for our splash screen for an Android device. And you saw it from our Figma design in here. This is going to load now. Excuse me. So here you saw that when we exported our oh, this sticky note shouldn't be there. I don't know why it was added there. So I'm just going to remove it. And I hope that we actually didn't create our splash screen with that in. We could double check that by bringing up Xcode and have a look at our assets and just have a look at these images shown in Finder. Excuse me. I'm going to bring it up and I can see that little sticky note wasn't in our splash screen. So that's really good. It was just probably a mistake from my side. So that's great. So as you saw for iOS, we exported these assets in here, 3, 2, 1, X, with these suffixes. So 2X for 2X, 3X for 3X, and nothing for the normal splash screen on 1X devices. But on Android, there's a lot more that we have to export. So I'll open that URL in here that you'll also see, and you'll see that these are the various resolutions that we have to export for our splash screen on Android. We're not in our application supporting LDPI in here, so we're going to go and export MDPI, HDPI, XHDPI, and etc., etc. So let's go ahead now in your Figma design right there, select your splash screen from the left-hand side, and go ahead, please, and remove all these exports that we'd created earlier. Okay, so what we need to do now is to make sure that we're conforming to these sizes for MDPI, for instance, and we're gonna basically select this splash screen and say export. And let's in here see that, okay, these are the sizes. So 1X, let's just say we don't want any suffix, and I've already prepared something like that before. So let me just show you how it should look like. And I'm gonna select this splash here, and you can see this is pretty much how you should create it. So 1X, and we say MDPI as it was displayed in here, MDPI, you see, and then we say 1.5X is HDPI and XHDPI, etc., etc. Okay, so let's go ahead and do something similar in our splash screen in here. So 1X, and as you could see in the one that I prepared here, 1X was MDPI. So let's go ahead and say a suffix is MDPI like that. So create another export in here, and we're in this case we need HDPI, which is 1.5x. So let's select this and say 1.5x, and we say HDPI like that. And then we go for the next one, which is XHDPI. So let's go and press the plus button in here and say 2x is AXHDPI. And then we go to the next level, which is XXHDPI. So let's press the plus button and say, and this needs to be 3x, XXHDPI, okay? So we're going to say XXHDPI. And last but not least, we have triple X HDPI, which is 4x the resolution. So let's say triple X, a plus button, triple X HDPI, and in here this should be 4x. Okay, so now, oops, I didn't want to create this drop shadow. So that's how yours should also look like with all these various resolutions in here. Okay. So now what I need you to do, please, is just to go ahead, so make sure that your splash screen is selected on the left-hand side, and then just go and export all of these. So let's just press the export button. So that's going to take its time and calculate basically all these different resolutions, prepare the PNGs for us, and it's going to pack them into a beautiful zip file, and then it's going to download that packed file for us. So depending on your connection speed, this could take some time. And the result I can see is an untitled 2 zip file of about 10 megabytes. So there we go. So let me double click on this file in order to unpack it, and I'm going to open the folder here for you so you can also see, as you can see, splash screen, it's all there. So they're all looking very similar to each other, but they have very different sizes, as you can see though. So the XXX HDPI has the size of almost 4 megabytes, whereas the MDPI is only 600 kilobytes. So now we got our images, perfect. So what we need to do is we're gonna basically call them splash screens and then place them inside various MIP maps folder in our Android application. So let me bring up Visual Studio Code in here. Let me see where I've placed my Visual Studio Code right there. Okay. And if you then go into exploration mode a little bit here, you can see we have an iOS folder. So let me just make the size a little bit bigger. Excuse me. And we have an Android folder in here. So if you go to Android and then app src main and then res, and you'll see that you have these MIP map folders, HDPI, MDPI, and all those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folders that we need for our 5 assets in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually name this file in here. Let me close this little folder that I have at the bottom of the screen as well. So, okay, so we start with MDPI in here. Let's just call it splash, okay? Splash PNG. And I'm just going to go to this MDPI folder here, and I can see I have a launcher icon and an IC launcher. So let's just drag this into MIP map MDPI if I can. And MIP map MDPI, there it is. So the MDPI one is done. Now I'm going to delete it from here. So now we have HDPI, then I'm going to call it splash again. Remember, it's HDPI. So I'm going to drag and drop it into the HDPI folder. So it's called splash PNG there as well. Then I'm going to delete it from here. Then we have the XHDPI. So I'm going to call it splash again. And remember, XHDPI. So let's go and drag it there. Great. Then delete it from here. Then we have XXHDPI. So call it splash again. And bring it into XX folder in here. And I can see it's right there, splash, okay? And last but not least, we have the XXX HDPI, and we're gonna call it splash again, and then let's go in here and bring it right there. Great, so now you should actually see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 images that we have exported and placed inside our Android folder. So then I can delete the last one safely. So now that we've done that, we need to actually tell our Android application to use those splash screens. So what we need to do is to look for Android window background inside our application. I'm going to close all these open tabs and I'm going to search for Android window background, just like that. Okay. So you'll find 4 of them, but only 2 of them are actually interesting for us. So what we need to do is actually, I'm going to go to my styles as well here. So as you can see here is using a drawable, but we're not using a drawable. A drawable is something that, for instance, if you look for launch background, let's go in here. You see these, can find launch background actually. Is there a drawable called launch? Oh, we don't have it right now. Okay, anyways. So I'm gonna search for Android window background as it was our mission. So let's go in here and find that window background. In here, as you can see, it says drawable launch background, and this file is Android app src main res values styles XML. So that's the first one, okay, that says drawable. So I need you in here to change this to mip map, and in here just say splash, which is the name of our file that we created. Okay, so that's the first occurrence of this Android window background. And then we're going to go in here as well, which is in Android app src main res values night styles XML, and call this mip map like that. And in here we also say splash. Perfect. So we've changed those. So what we need to do now is to actually test our changes on Android as well. So I'm going to close all those tabs as you saw, and let's just go to main Dart file just to have a Dart file open. And then I'm going to stop the running of this application because I don't really know. I think it's actually running the application on the iPhone simulator. And then I'm going to say Command-Shift-P on a Macintosh or Control-Shift-P in Windows and Linux if you're on Visual Studio Code. And then say Flutter, select device, as you can see in here. And then I'm going to choose my Android phone. Okay. And as you know from the previous chapters, I actually prefer to run my applications real phones. And then run without debugging. And this is going to basically kickstart our Gradle build process in here. And while that is ongoing, I'll go and bring scrcpy to the screen. So here it is. And I can see nothing actually. What happened to our build? I think our build somehow crashed. So let's go and build again and see what happens. Debug console, and okay, I can see it says there is a problem. And let's see, an error, expected color reference bot got raw string, mipmap splash. Okay, so let's have a look at what we actually did with this mipmap splash. I can see I've actually written incorrectly. I've written me map. So that could explain it. It's a mip map. So if you've done the same mistake as me in one place, please just correct this. So it's mip map. All right, so fine. Okay, fair enough. And let's now try to run the application again and see if it can compile this time. So it says it got a raw string again, and it's now, did I really type it incorrectly? Did I write mimimap? This is unbelievable. If I've actually done that. So, so no, I think I've actually written it in two places incorrectly. So mipmap. All right. It would be very comical if I made a mistake again while trying to fix my previous mistakes. So let's see now if the Android build is going to go through successfully. So I'll just wait here until that task is done. Okay, it's built successfully. I was just going to go grab some coffee. And it's connecting now. So that actually went really fast, I would say. Gradle builds in here are surprisingly fast when running with Flutter, for instance, compared to the iOS Xcode build system. So I'm going to bring up scrcpy in here, and I can see the application running without a problem, but we didn't actually see our splash screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the process in here, which kills the application. And then I'm going to find our application here and then open it. And then I can see our beautiful splash screen on the screen when the application starts. So that's also working as expected, no problems at all. And remember, we've done quite a lot of work now. We've done like icons from the previous chapters, and we've also worked on our splash screen. So there's lots that we've done, but we haven't really committed any of these because the work wasn't complete. However, now that we have both icons and splash screens on both iOS and Android, I think it's time that we do as we usually do at the end of every chapter, is to commit our work and make sure that we're not going to lose it. So I'm going to do some reshuffling on the screen right here, and I'm going to increase the size here as well. So I'm going to go to terminal then, like this, and let's then have a look at the status. And you can see that we've done a lot of work. So there are many files that have been changed, as you can see in here, modified, a tremendous amount of work. So let's just say git add all, and then let's commit all this work as, is it step 28? Yes, step 28. Okay. So if you look at our log, so we have step 27 and then we have step 28 as well. So I want to push all these changes, and this push is actually quite a big push because we have a lot of resources that we're pushing to GitHub. So, or wherever you're hosting your Git repository, it could be Bitbucket or somewhere else, but depending on your connection and the ability of your host to receive these files, this operation could actually take some time. So, and after we've done that, let's also tag our work as step 28, like that, and push our tags. All right, so if I say now git tag, we should have 26, 27, and 28 line up right there. So perfect, and we should have no status right now. Awesome. As is tradition, after our tagging and committing everything, at the end of every chapter, we talk about what we need to discuss in the chapter that is to come. And I can't believe we're actually getting to this point in this course. It is such a huge moment, both for me, and I hope it is for you as well, because we are actually going to submit our iOS application to the App Store. So without further ado, if you want to get some refreshments, please do, and I'll see you in the next chapter.